The bridge groaned once, a sharp metallic pop echoing through the air like a warning shot. I watched from my porch as the entire eastern span of the illegally constructed highway began to tilt, slowly at first, then all at once, like a drunk realizing too late they've missed the last step. Steel twisted, concrete buckled, and when it finally collapsed, taking 2 HOA security vehicles and their smug little checkpoint kiosk down into the ravine with it, I didn't even flinch. I sipped my coffee. The mug read, "Licensed, bonded, engineered for vengeance." They thought I'd let them steal my land, fine me into silence, and bury me beneath their corruption. Do they even realize what happens when you piss off the guy who designed half the bridges in this county? I heard the first jackhammer before sunrise, a deep rhythmic pounding that didn't belong on my land, not even on my worst mornings. I was pouring coffee, barefoot in my kitchen, when the window panes began to shake. At first, I thought it was a minor quake. We get those sometimes, but the tremors weren't from below. They were coming from the east field. My field. I walked out onto the porch in nothing but my flannel and boots, mug steaming in one hand, and saw what looked like a military-grade construction convoy carving through the tree line. Bulldozers, excavators, surveying drones hovering in slow, lazy circles. They had already torn a path the size of a football field through my orchard and flattened 2 of the old irrigation towers like they were paper dolls. The worst part? A sign posted on a fresh slab of concrete at the edge of the chaos. Future site of Clearpass Highway Overpass, Section 8B, in association with Forest Glen HOA. The HOA. The same HOA that hadn't managed to fix the neighborhood stop sign in 8 years, was now apparently in the business of building major infrastructure. I stood there stunned, coffee going cold in my hands, as a hard hat-wearing man with a clipboard marched toward me like I was the intruder. "You'll need to stay behind the orange flag, sir," he barked. "Active construction zone." I didn't move. "This is my property," I said flatly. He barely looked up. "This land's been designated for Phase 3 infrastructure. Your HOA signed the clearance forms last quarter. We've got full right-of-way." I stared at him. "Right-of-way? That's impossible. I never signed anything." He smirked. "Didn't say you did. That was the first red flag. The second was when I contacted the county clerk's office, and they had no record of any public infrastructure project in our zone. No permits, no hearings, no right-of-way requests, no EPA clearances. Nothing. Just a black hole where records should have been. And yet the construction raged on, day and night, like it had been greenlit by the governor himself. I confronted the HOA that week, or tried to. The office door was locked, their phones forwarded to voicemail, and every board member I emailed either ignored me or sent back pre-written auto-replies with the same generic line: "We appreciate your concern regarding the Clearpass Overpass development. All actions have been approved through the HOA Charter. See Section 17C. Section 17C didn't exist. I checked the bylaws myself. My name is Lucas Reed. I'm a structural engineer with a state license, a 30-year reputation, and an impeccable record. I've consulted on 3 international bridge projects and helped write California's seismic load code updates in 2016. I know what legal infrastructure looks like and what they were doing out there. It wasn't legal. It wasn't even close. I went to the site the next morning with a copy of my deed in hand. I wanted to speak to whoever was in charge. Instead, I was met by a woman in a tailored beige blazer with a laminated badge that read Project Oversight, HOA Affairs. Her name was Cynthia Hargrove, blonde, Botoxed. The kind of woman who looked like she never lifted anything heavier than a non-disclosure agreement. "Mr. Reed," she greeted me like we were old enemies. "Your lot was reviewed and flagged for infrastructure utility redirection under the Public-Private Development Clause passed last April. Your HOA holds partial easement rights to coordinate traffic solutions in areas of strategic development." "Strategic development?" I barked. "You mean the bridge you're building through my orchard? Without permits? Without environmental clearance? Without my damn consent?" She smiled, that dead-eyed corporate smirk. "You'll find that consent was implicit in your agreement when you purchased property under Forest Glen jurisdiction. It's all in the addendum.
What addendum?
The digital one. You mean the one that was uploaded 3 months after I closed escrow? Her face didn't even twitch. Feel free to consult your counsel if you'd like to contest. Then she handed me a bright yellow envelope. And since we're on the topic of compliance, you've been served a formal fine in the amount of $700 for obstruction of infrastructure development. That includes delays, damages, and contractor overtime caused by your verbal interference and failure to vacate the easement zone. I opened the envelope. It was real. A formal lien, stamped, filed, processed. $700,000. More than the value of my entire home. They were trying to financially vaporize me and bury me under their damn bridge. I should have felt fear. Instead, I felt that cold, methodical stillness that only comes when I smell structural fraud. And this reeked. I spent the next 5 nights poring through everything. Every HOA newsletter, every county filing, every zoning board report. I found inconsistencies in the parcel maps. I found approvals missing digital signatures. I found a building plan marked Confidential Internal Use Only that had been uploaded and deleted within the same hour on a hidden subdomain of the HOA's website. And I found the smoking gun, a memo from HOA President Geraldine Parrish to County Commissioner Raymond Kessler dated 2 weeks before ground was broken. It read, "Kessler, per our agreement, bridge development will proceed regardless of individual titleholder dissent. Reed's property is key. Fast-track the easement filing and push the paperwork through via C-15 overrides. If he protests, bury him in fines and get legal to prep the foreclosure path. We'll cut you in on Phase 2 if it goes through without litigation." They weren't just screwing me over. They were selling my land, my home, my entire generational property as part of a backroom land grab disguised as community progress. And the bridge? That wasn't for traffic. It was a commercial access point for a mega development that hadn't even been disclosed to the public yet. 77 luxury condos, a parking structure, and a retail plaza to elevate Forest Glen's economic profile. My house was going to be the new off-ramp. The HOA didn't just violate code, they violated state law, federal law. And they tried to fine me for noticing. I hired a lawyer. I filed injunctions. I sent cease and desist letters to every subcontractor. The HOA responded by doubling the fine and claiming I'd threatened a government project. They had the audacity to cite Homeland Security provisions to justify continued construction. Homeland Security. For a bridge funded by bribes and built on lies. That was the moment I knew I wasn't dealing with idiots. I was dealing with a cartel. A suburban mafia hiding behind gated community smiles and legalese. But they'd made one fatal mistake. They forgot I was the guy who designed the load distribution protocols for the entire North Valley corridor. I knew how bridges failed. I knew what they needed to stand. And more importantly, I knew exactly what happened when you took the wrong shortcuts. They didn't just pick the wrong landowner, they picked the wrong engineer. And when that bridge came crashing down, they were going to learn just how catastrophic a single miscalculation could be. They thought they buried me with that fine $700 for obstruction was meant to be the kill shot, the financial guillotine that would force me to forfeit, fold, or run. But they didn't realize that I'd spent the last 25 years of my life tearing apart faulty blueprints, gutting corner-cut projects, and testifying in courtrooms against exactly this kind of civic fraud. I don't scare easy. I don't panic. I document. And that's exactly what I did. I converted my study into a war room. Blueprints pinned to corkboards. Zoning laws printed in binders. A live spreadsheet tracking every permit number. Every environmental exemption. Every contractor listed on the HOA's mysteriously redacted build roster. And the deeper I dug, the more grotesque it got. The bridge was a Frankenstein's monster of illegal compromises. The support pilings violated Section 12 of the State Water Protection Code. They were being driven directly into a riparian zone without proper aquifer displacement review. The deck structure used recycled concrete composite that had already failed quality checks in 2 previous state projects. The slope tolerances were off by degrees that would buckle under a flood. It wasn't just illegal. It was criminal negligence masquerading as progress. I compiled everything into an evidence matrix and reached out to the County Zoning and Infrastructure Board. I expected red tape. What I got was silence. No returned calls, no acknowledgement. When I finally reached a junior clerk, he whispered into the receiver like someone was watching him. "Sir, this project was flagged internally months ago. We were told to step back. Something about federal designation." "There is no federal designation," I snapped. "That's my land. I never consented." "I know," he muttered. "That's why I'm warning you. Back off. You're not supposed to be looking at this." And then he hung up. That night my water shut off. No warning, no leak, no reason. The utility company claimed scheduled maintenance, but when I pressed for documentation, they forwarded me to the HOA's infrastructure liaison. Her name was Karen Foster, HOA treasurer, compliance chair. The blonde dragon behind the HOA's real enforcement machine. She spoke in rehearsed legal phrases, with a voice that sounded like she was always one paragraph ahead of you in a lawsuit. "Unfortunately, your property is currently under investigation for noncompliance. Due to the active lien and your refusal to vacate the easement zone, essential services may be temporarily suspended for community safety." "Community safety?" I repeated. "You mean because I called out your illegal bridge?" She didn't even flinch. "You have the right to appeal. In the meantime, we've assigned your property a Level 3 disturbance status. Additional penalties may accrue if you continue to interfere." She hung up without waiting for a response. 2 hours later, I lost power, then internet, then garbage collection. My house had become a black hole, off-grid in the middle of a perfectly functioning neighborhood. I stepped outside the next morning to find a compliance violation sign staked into my lawn, wrapped in yellow caution tape like a crime scene. And in a way, it was. The crime was that I still lived there. Karen didn't stop at utilities. She took the battle public. The local HOA newsletter, which most residents ignored until it showed up in their inboxes, suddenly ran a special bulletin about me. They called me a radical obstructionist, claimed I was a disgruntled homeowner with a history of lawsuits, said I was under investigation for threats against public officials. The lies were creative. Almost impressive. One post even suggested I was an anti-progress extremist affiliated with a fringe separatist group. A photo of me speaking at a structural safety conference in a windbreaker was edited to make me look like I was ranting at a political rally. The smear campaign spread fast. Some neighbors stopped waving. Others crossed the street. I found 2 hate notes stuffed in my mailbox, one telling me to leave town before the bulldozers do it for you. And then the lawsuit hit. A 142-page monstrosity accusing me of defamation, intentional disruption of a sanctioned municipal project, and civil misconduct. Filed jointly by the HOA and a shell company called Stratus Pacific Developers, LLC. The same shell company I'd traced as the primary beneficiary of the ClearPass Phase 2 expansion. The lawsuit was filed with a judge who used to be Karen Foster's law partner. Small world. My lawyer, a quiet, steel-spined litigator named Elliot Price, read the first 30 pages, raised one eyebrow, and said, "They're not just trying to silence you. They're trying to financially detonate you." "Then I hope they brought enough explosives," I replied. "Because I've got blueprints, permits, drone footage, and one pissed-off whistleblower." That last part came the week after the lawsuit. I got a call at 11:17 p.m., a blocked number. Male voice, hoarse and fast, like he was speaking from a closet. "You don't know me. I used to be on the crew. Phase 1 contractor. They're hiding the cracks." "Who is?" I asked. "Everyone. But mostly Karen. Look under the northern abutment. They re-poured the tension plates. No post-cure. Concrete's already hairlining. It'll shear under a heavy load." "Why are you telling me this?" "Because I'm not dying under that thing, and I have a daughter who rides that school bus." Click. The line went dead. I checked my footage from the drone I'd launched 3 nights prior. Focused on the northern abutment. Zoomed. Enhanced. There it was. A microfracture in the beam cap. You had to know where to look. But it was there. And if that bridge was used as a commercial access route, it would collapse in less than a year. I uploaded the footage, encrypted everything, and sent copies to Elliott, the state engineering board, and an old friend of mine in the press. I didn't stop there. I started talking to neighbors. Not all of them believed me at first, but the ones who did, they'd been burned before. Mrs. Thorne at Lot 12 fined $1,200 for a non-conforming porch light. Mr. McAllister on Ridgeview forced to demolish his grandson's treehouse because it blocked aesthetic sightlines. The Rodriguezes cited for excessive window tint. The Burkes slapped with liens over flower colors. Karen had ruled like a queen with a petty iron fist, and now her enemies had a rallying cry. We called ourselves the Boundary Alliance. Quiet at first. Small meetings, park benches, folded papers slipped under doors. But we were building something. Not a revolution, a resistance. Meanwhile, I filed for an emergency review with the State Board of Civil Engineering, attached all my findings, structural flaws, zoning fraud, material violations, environmental code breaches. The press didn't bite immediately, but someone at the local paper finally cracked. A story ran, "Engineer claims illegal HOA bridge threatens public safety." That was the moment Karen snapped. She held a press conference on the HOA lawn, called me a disgraced former contractor, threatened to countersue the paper, invited cameras to film the construction site, which, conveniently, had been manicured to hide the worst violations. But the damage was done. The narrative had started shifting. And that's when things got personal. I came home one night and found my truck keyed from bumper to bumper. "Traitor" scratched across the hood in jagged letters. My security cams went offline at 2:14 a.m. that same night. Signal jammed. The next day, I found a dead raccoon duck taped to my front gate. No note, no blood, just a message. I didn't flinch. I sent the footage to the sheriff. They called it neighborhood harassment and filed it under pending. I knew what it was, a warning, but I've faced worse in war zones. I'd been buried under rubble in Istanbul during a site collapse, dug out with my hands. Karen's little scare tactics were amateur hour. And, the best part, while she was busy attacking me, I kept digging. I found the campaign donation trail, 30-0, from Stratus Pacific to Commissioner Kessler. Another 18-0 to Zoning Board Director Martin Griggs. Both filed under consulting expenses. I printed it all. I wasn't just documenting corruption anymore. I was building a warhead. And when it dropped, it wouldn't be a lawsuit. It wouldn't be a protest. It would be collapse from the inside. I didn't need to sabotage the bridge. I just needed to wait for gravity to do its job. Because Karen and her thugs hadn't just built an illegal overpass. They'd built their empire on a foundation of sand, and I'd just started kicking. I wasn't supposed to be in that meeting. That's what made it perfect. The invitation was meant for a man named Clarence Dobson, a long-retired zoning consultant with just enough credential dust to get past the check-in clipboard. He lived 3 houses down from me and kept to himself, until the HOA fined him $14,200 for a non-standard roof slope, and he packed up and left town. The HOA never updated their contact sheet. But I did. I printed a fake ID badge, wore a dusty blazer that screamed, "washed-up bureaucrat," and walked into the Glenwood Country Club conference hall like I belonged there. It was a closed session, no press allowed, authorized stakeholders only, per the embossed flyers sent to board members and high-value property owners. A few wore suits, more wore golf polos and smug expressions. The air stank of wealth and whispered promises. And in the center of it all was Karen Foster, flanked by Commissioner Kessler and a man with a real estate logo embroidered on his sleeve. Stratus Pacific Development. She called the meeting to order like she was chairing the United Nations. Tonight, she began, we finalized the alignment between community planning goals and economic revitalization through Phase 3. That was their euphemism for what they were really doing. Carving a path through private land, laundering it through a fraudulent HOA charter, and flipping it into corporate profit under the banner of community growth. They had a projector set up, but nothing was saved online, just USB sticks passed hand to hand. I positioned myself near the buffet table, notebook open, pen scratching like I was taking notes on landscaping compliance, but I was recording everything. One board member asked about the ongoing federal inquiries. My filings had rattled some cages. "We've scrubbed the liability chain," Karen said flatly. "The permits are grandfathered through the 2009 corridor adjustment. Legally, it's a gray zone," Kessler chimed in. "And by the time they untangle it, the bridge will be finished. Sunset clauses lock in asset transfer to Stratus. At that point, we're protected." Another man in a blue jacket asked, "What about Reed?" Karen didn't blink. "He'll be gone by winter. His liens exceed his property value. We've already submitted an abandonment claim. They plan to take my home. Like it was a chess piece they could brush off the board." I walked out before they noticed me, copied the USB content using a portable imager I'd built back in undergrad, and drove straight home. I didn't sleep. I opened every file, every blueprint, every ledger, and what I found made my teeth ache. Not only had they falsified wetland surveys to greenlight construction, but they'd also concealed a buried diesel spill from 1994, the plume of which now ran directly under the bridge foundation. That meant the entire project was in violation of the Clean Water Act, EPA protocols, and 3 separate hazard ordinances. It wasn't a gray area, it was a federal minefield. I compiled the evidence, time-stamped it, encrypted it, and sent it to the California State Environmental Protection Bureau, the EPA Regional Desk, and the Federal Highway Infrastructure Oversight Unit. No more petitions, no more polite requests. This was a formal report, and it hit harder than I'd expected. 3 days later, a white Ford truck rolled onto the construction site. Men stepped out wearing state badges. Not one of them smiled. Within the hour, construction halted. Equipment powered down. Cement mixers were idled mid-pour. Contractors argued with men in windbreakers. I watched from the ridge with binoculars and a thermos full of bitter coffee, and for the first time in weeks, I allowed myself a breath. I had won, but the bridge still stood. That's the cruel part no one tells you. Justice doesn't move like a hammer. It moves like water, slow, heavy, and wearing you down one drip at a time. The site froze, but the structure remained. And while I waited for agencies to act, the HOA moved fast. They doubled the fines, then tripled them. According to their revised charter, approved in a shadow vote where no homeowners were present, any resident obstructing infrastructure expansion during an authorized development cycle was subject to rolling penalties and asset-based collection. My 700. Zero lien ballooned to 1.4 million, then 2.1. They weren't just squeezing me, they were preparing to swallow me whole. And then, on a Wednesday morning heavy with smoke from nearby wildfires, they struck. I came home from town, picking up a new hard drive and a gallon of gas for the generator, to find a padlock on my gate. My mailbox was gone. My house, my land, my barn, cordoned off with caution tape like a murder scene. And taped to the gate? A notice. Notice of seizure. Forest Glen Ho. Pursuant to Lien Recovery Clause 9B. Property deemed abandoned and forfeited due to prolonged non-payment. HOA assumes stewardship for community protection. I stood there, fingers trembling not from fear but from something colder. Abandoned. They called my home, my land, abandoned. I walked the perimeter. The back gate had been chained shut. They'd changed the padlocks. My cameras were either disabled or removed. Inside the window, I could see the light blinking on my fridge. They hadn't even cut the power. They just wanted me gone. The house still held my tools, my grandfather's rifle, my dog's leash. They left it all there like I didn't matter, like I'd been deleted. And that's when it snapped. Not the power, not the strategy, not the resolve. Me. The last thread. The one thing I'd held together through threats, lies, lawsuits, fines. It broke. Not in rage, not in violence, in silence. A silence so heavy, it felt surgical. I walked back to my truck, climbed in, turned the engine over, and drove. Not home. That wasn't home anymore. I drove out past city limits, past cell service, to the one place no one monitored. An old gravel access road where I kept a cabin and a cache of gear from the days when I used to teach structural collapse training. Steel cable, pressure gauges, microcam feeds, blueprints. I laid them all out. Every angle of the bridge, every beam and bolt, every weld point I'd watched them botch. I ran simulations, stress models, load factors. I calculated, adjusted, recalibrated. Not to destroy it, that was never my goal, but to predict what would happen if a load-bearing component failed. The margin for collapse was already razor thin. One rain season, one overloaded truck, one design flaw. I wasn't planning revenge. I was writing a eulogy for a structure that had been doomed from the first pour. When I drove back into town 2 nights later, it was under cover of darkness. The HOA's surveillance van still circled like a predator, but I knew its blind spots. I slipped through the ravine trail and cut through the tree line to reach my barn. It was still locked, but not for long. I bypassed the cheap padlock with a shim tool I'd made myself and slid the doors open slow. The interior was untouched, dusty, but undisturbed. That was their mistake. They hadn't searched the barn. And what lay buried beneath the floorboards was something they hadn't planned for. 3 metal cases, labeled clean, secure. Evidence files, printouts, time-stamped recordings, signed affidavits from the whistleblower contractor, stored in triplicate, soil samples, structural assessment reports. One case was labeled collapse risk pending. I hadn't shown anyone that one yet, because when I did, the bridge wouldn't just be halted, it would be condemned. I carried them out one by one, loaded them into the truck, and parked down the road behind a billboard. Waited for daylight, then made my final calls. The news stations, the engineers, the EPA. I scheduled everything. By the time the sun came up, I wasn't just a man with a grievance. I was a bomb with a clock, and they had no idea how close they were to the detonation. It started with a hairline crack no wider than a fingernail, a microscopic fracture in the northern abutment I'd photographed 3 weeks earlier and logged as point of first failure in my collapse projection report. At 3:14 p.m., after a stretch of record heat followed by sudden rain, the thermal expansion differential pushed that fracture just past threshold. Concrete doesn't scream when it dies. It groans, it whispers, and then it snaps like bone under pressure. The bridge didn't fail all at once. It failed exactly as I predicted it would, in stages, by design, under its own weight. First came the slouving at Pier 3, where the rebar was poorly set and the concrete never properly cured. That loss of compression sent a shock wave down the decking structure, which had been poured with subgrade cement I'd traced back to a bankrupt supplier in Nevada. From there, the load shifted violently to Pier 2, which was resting on soil saturated from the unreported diesel spill. The abutment sheared, the support gave. And in front of half a dozen contractors, a county inspector, and a Channel 7 news drone filming a puff piece on local economic development, 140 feet of bridge buckled like wet cardboard. The center span dropped 12 feet in 2 seconds. A backhoe and a half-loaded gravel truck went down with it. No one died, I made sure of that. I'd sent anonymous reports warning of instability. I'd leaked data to engineers I trusted. The work crews had scaled back. No one was beneath the drop zone. But when it fell, it made a sound like judgment. And judgment came fast. Within minutes, police cordoned off the site. Within hours, federal investigators were en route. And at exactly 5:00 p.m., as a crowd gathered behind yellow tape and chattered about lawsuits and fines, I stepped through the crowd with a single hard case under my arm and approached the site supervisor. "I need to speak to the officials in charge," I said calmly. "This collapse wasn't an accident, and I can prove it." It didn't take long to get their attention. I laid out my binder on the hood of a sheriff's vehicle, page after page of signed documents, design schematics, material reports, emails, secret recordings, satellite footage, soil samples, and the holy grail, a full-scale finite element simulation showing the exact failure path that had just occurred. The lead federal engineer looked pale as he flipped through it. "You projected this?" he asked. "Down to the hour," I said. "They ignored every warning I gave them. And if I hadn't made noise, if I hadn't forced delays, if I hadn't leaked inspections, there would have been school buses on that bridge next month." By 8 p.m., a perimeter had been established around the entire site. A formal disaster response classification was initiated. The collapsed bridge was now a federal crime scene. I gave my full statement under oath. When they asked me what motivated me, I didn't talk about the money or the fines or even my home. I told them the truth. They thought the law didn't apply to them. That's why I used the one law they couldn't bend, physics. The fallout came like a landslide. The next morning's headlines were apocalyptic. "Bridge built by HOA collapses in shocking structural failure." "Illegal highway project exposed." "Whistleblower predicted collapse." HOA under criminal probe. Karen Foster's face was everywhere. So was Commissioner Kessler's. So was mine. But where they looked hunted, I looked steady. Because I'd been ready for this moment for weeks. As the indictments came down, I watched with cold satisfaction. Karen was arrested first, not by local police, but by a joint federal-state task force. She was charged with conspiracy to commit fraud, falsification of infrastructure permits, violation of the Clean Water Act, and willful endangerment. Her bail was denied. Kessler followed. So did Martin Griggs from the zoning board. And then came the developers, executives at Stratus Pacific, 2 of whom tried to flee to Belize before being pulled off a private jet at LAX. 31 indictments in total, 6 resignations, 4 plea deals, 23 properties seized under RICO statutes after the paper trail proved the HOA had essentially been operating as a racketeering front. The Forest Glen HOA was dissolved by judicial order. Every fine they'd levied was invalidated. Every home lien was canceled. My property and every other homeowner they'd targeted was restored. The fines, gone. The liens, wiped. The bridge, declared unsafe, unsalvageable, and ordered demolished under emergency mitigation protocols. And me? I walked back onto my land on a clear autumn morning as bulldozers rolled in to tear down the rest of the structure that had haunted my view. The air smelled of diesel, metal, and justice. A local news crew caught me sipping coffee on my porch, the same spot where I'd watched it all begin. They asked if I had anything to say to the community. I looked at the camera, calm as a judge, and said, "Never bet against the man who built the code." That clip went viral. I didn't mean for it to, but it caught fire. Engineers shared it. Veterans shared it. Journalists picked it up. I got calls from firms in New York, D.C., San Francisco, offering consulting deals, book deals, podcasts. I turned them all down. I wasn't in this for fame. I just wanted my land back, my quiet, my right to exist without being buried under someone else's empire. When the last beam of the collapsed bridge was cut and hauled off, I stood at the edge of the cleared foundation and ran my hand through the soil. It was my soil again, free of lies, free of fines, free of cement and corruption. That night, I poured myself a glass of bourbon, grilled a steak, and sat on the porch while the stars came out over a sky unobstructed by concrete. The crickets returned. So did the silence. And somewhere, deep in the void where outrage used to sit like a coiled snake, I felt peace for the first time in months. In the weeks that followed, the neighborhood transformed. Without the HOA, people started painting their houses how they wanted. Someone installed a windmill. Another put up solar panels. The Rodriguezes grew wildflowers in the front yard. No more letters. No more citations. Just a quiet rebellion turned renaissance. I still kept the binder. I still have the files. Not out of paranoia, out of memory. Because what they did should never be forgotten. They tried to build a bridge through my life. I dismantled it with math. And when it fell, it didn't just take their plans with it. It took their power and gave us ours back. That's the thing about justice. It doesn't need fanfare. It just needs gravity. And the willingness to let the truth do what bridges built on lies always do eventually collapse.